This is the ZowieTek 4K encoder, and it's called the ZowieBox. So I'm just gonna unbox it quickly. Here's the quick start guide. USB-C to USB-C cable. Cord shoe to 1/4" 20. This looks like the charger for it. So let's just see what current and voltage it provides. So that's 5 volts at 3 amps, or 9 volts at 2.77 amps, or 12 volts at 2.1 amps. And here's the ZowieBox itself. So on the back there's a screen, and on the bottom there's a fan, and I think that's a 1/4" 20 thread. And then on the front there's a tally light, and there's a small hole here which I don't know whether that's the reset button. And here you have the audio out, and that's audio in, USB-A port. So the thing with the USB-A port is you can actually write the video into the USB, so you can connect the USB stick and just record the video onto the USB prior to it being streamed or outputted. And then you have the HDMI out and a place for micro SD card, and on this side you have USB-C, and then you have the Ethernet port, which can be used for NDI as well as network connectivity, and it does support power over Ethernet. So essentially you can power the ZowieBox with the Ethernet cable as well as the USB-C port. And the network port can also be used to store videos externally, so while you're encoding a video you can simultaneously also save it to a network attached storage if you didn't want to save it to a USB stick or a micro SD card. And then here you have a DC out 12 volts. So this is interesting because it's a DC out, and this is something to be careful about so that you don't actually insert a power adapter into this, because this is out as opposed to in. And the purpose of this DC out, I suppose, is to power a monitor. And then here you have the HDMI in, and some holes which I assume will be used to draw in air for cooling, or maybe push out air. The ZowieBox weighs 166 grams, and its dimensions are 12.3 centimeters in this orientation and 6.8 centimeters width, and the thickness is 2.2 centimeters. So it's smaller than a smartphone but thicker than a smartphone, and 166 grams is about the same weight as a smartphone. Okay, so this is the ZowieBox. This is the adapter for it and the USB cable, and I'm going to plug in an Ethernet cable on this side. And here on the front you have the screen, and on the back you have the tally light. So I'm gonna plug in the USB-C port here and switch the USB adapter on. Here you can see that the tally light has come on, and the screen is on this side as well. And on the bottom of the camera you can see all the details of this specific box in terms of the URL that you can use to access it, or the IP address and the username and password. So this might be a bit too bright. Okay, so as you can see the details of this device. So you can see the IP address there, and the temperature and free memory and so on. But essentially If you type in that IP address on your computer, which is connected to the same network as this device, then you'll be able to access it and essentially use all the features. We just make this a bit darker in case the screen is not visible. And I don't know if you can hear this or not, but this is the fan. So I'm going to bring the fan a bit closer to the microphone. So the fan does make some noise, so you probably don't want it too close to the microphone. I tend to use a directional microphone when I'm videoing sports. So I would put it essentially on the back or below the camera, so it shouldn't interfere too much. And that's the tally light, so I've switched off all the tally light settings. Anyway, I'll go through all the interface and the details of what you can change and what to do. This is the GH5 Mark II, which I use with this encoder. So I'll plug in the HDMI cable into the box. So where it says HDMI in. So HDMI in, and there you have the Ethernet port and the USB cable for powering the device. And this setup allows me to stream from this device while I record the high quality video footage onto the camera itself. So even though the ZowieBox can record the video, I can stream through the ZowieBox and then record the video footage internally on the SD card of the camera. Otherwise, this camera can also stream directly, but it cannot stream and record video footage at the same time. So once you type in the IP address of the ZowieBox in your browser and press return, then you come across this screen and you type in admin for the username here and admin for the password, and then log in. Once you log in, you first come to the PTZ screen, and I'm not using PTZ camera, so I won't be able to move around the camera or anything like that. So I will go to settings, and I'll quickly go over the settings for the ZowieBox. So you see how much memory is being used, and this is for the DC out port on the ZowieBox. I don't actually use this, but if you're using a PTZ camera, you can consume up to 1 amp with 12 volts from this port. So I've disabled it, but if you're going to use it for a screen that uses 1 amp or less with 12 volts, then you can enable it and use it there. And here you can see the CPU usage and the temperature as well. And here you can see the IP address of the ZowieBox that I'm using, as well as the local DNS name for it. And that's the subnet mask and default gateway for the network which I'm on. And that's the MAC address of it. So I've switched off the Wi-Fi, but you can use the Wi-Fi in 2 different modes. So you can either use it for connecting externally, or you can use it as a hotspot so that you can connect your computer directly to the ZowieBox and then configure it there. Whereas right now I've connected a Ethernet cable to the ZowieBox. So you don't necessarily need to do that. You can just connect it using Wi-Fi. And just to show this, this is the internet status. So it just does a ping. I don't know which server it pings, but it pings somewhere on the internet. You could probably check this if you want to scan your outgoing connections. And then the LAN status, so you can ping this as well, and it gives you succeed. And there's a scan option, so this will scan for any other ZowieBox or ZowieTek devices on the local network. So I only have this one device on my network, so that's the only one that you can see there. And ZowieBox has a tally light. I've disabled it because I don't really work in a studio environment where I would need that. But if you're working in a studio environment, you can enable the tally light so that whoever's in front of the camera can know what state the camera is in. And you can also switch it to manual, so you can choose how you want to configure it. And it can have different colors, like I think red, green, white, and blue. And it encodes 2 different streams, so you can choose settings for that. And I've already made some changes to my settings. So if you log in for the first time, you might have your settings to be slightly different to this. And this is the video out. Again, this is not the streaming part. This is the looping out. So you know you have the HDMI out port, this is what that reference is. And then you have the audio as well, and you can choose where you want the source of the audio to be. So it can be the HDMI cable, or it can be the audio line in on the ZowieBox device. And you have a few different options in terms of the streaming. I'll go to that in a bit more detail, but you can do RTSP. So if you want to read it to maybe OBS on your desktop and then stream from there, you can do that. In my case, I want to stream directly to YouTube using RTMP. So I'll go over that in a little bit more detail later. And this is for NDI. I don't actually use NDI, but if you want to use NDI, then this box also supports that. So again, on the left-hand side, you have the list of different menu items, I guess. So if you go to camera, PTZ, you have the different options there. I don't use PTZ, so I won't go into any details here. And then you have the tally light. So you can see I've disabled it, but if you want, you can enable it. And you can choose auto or manual, and then you can choose whether you want to have it off, red light, green light. There's more lights which are not indicated here, so I suspect they can only be used in the automatic mode. So I'm going to disable this again because I don't use a tally light. And then if you go to video, here you can see HDMI, and if you press refresh, you'll see the resolution that's coming into your device, as well as the audio frequency. So I have 4K at 30p coming in and audio at 48 kilohertz. Doesn't tell you the bit rate, but you can only see the frequency for the audio. And the ZowieBox can encode 2 different streams. I'm not really concerned with the secondary stream, so I will only be using the mainstream. And since I'm using RTMP, it only seems to work with H.264. And in terms of profile, you have 3 profiles. So the baseline profile, the main profile, and the high profile. So the profiles essentially tell you how much compression the video will have. So the encoding, if you set it to base profile, it will have little compression, which means the file sizes will be large. But because I want to send this over an internet connection to YouTube, I want to set it to high profile, and that will do the maximum compression, which means the file sizes will be smaller. So if I'm using a bitrate of 3 megabits per second, then that 3 megabits per second will have a higher quality than if I had it at the baseline profile with 3 megabits per second. So my recommendation is to set it to high and the resolution to 1080p, which you can set it to 4K, but I don't have the bandwidth on my internet connection to be able to cater for that. So the reason I'm setting it to 1080p is because of the limitation on my internet connection. So I will be connecting through 4G or 5G, but I won't have a good upload speed. So I would rather set everything to a low setting to just make sure that I have a stable and reliable stream. And I've set it to constant bitrate because essentially my decision is based on the internet connection. So 3 megabits per second seems doable on 4G connections and 5G connections, even when the speed is not good. And 1080p seems to be fine in terms of streaming, since most people watch the stream on mobile devices. And I've set the frame rate to 30 frames per second. Ideally, I would like to have it at 60 frames per second, but again, because my bandwidth doesn't support it, I would rather have 30 frames per second and have a reliable stream than set it to 60 frames per second where I don't have the necessary bandwidth for that. And the iframe interval essentially tells you how frequently there should be a full capture of the image for each frame. So here we say every 30 frames, capture the full image and publish that. And then for the next 29 frames, essentially just publish the changes between that initial frame and the newer frames. So I would say 1 iframe per second would be the minimum that you want as a generic guide. And then it depends on how much change there is in the visual image capture of the camera. And then the stream has the option to rotate it by 90 degrees, 180 degrees, and 270 degrees. So 180 degrees is good if you have your camera mounted upside down and you want to just kind of turn it so that it's in the correct orientation for the people who are watching the stream, and 90 and 270 are good if you're streaming vertically, so you can rotate it to make sure that it's at a correct angle. So these are the settings I have, and these are the settings that work for me. So I'm going to save those. And it takes a little bit of time for the saving to happen on the box. And here we have the output. I'm not really concerned with the output. So this is the loop out, the HDMI out. But you could use that if you wanted to just have a visual indication of what's being streamed. And here you have the overlays. And I think this is the most interesting part of the ZowieBox for me. So you can create a canvas. I'm going to create a canvas now, actually. I'm going to call it football, and I will set the resolution to 1080p because that's the resolution that I want to stream at. In fact, let me do football 1080p so that if I create multiple canvases later, I know which one I'm going to pick for which sport, for example. So I'm going to confirm that. And here you can add text and images. So I'm going to add a text and just say live stream start, and then I'm gonna type in live stream starting at, oh, let me just say live stream starts, let's just say 2 o'clock, and let me make it big and bold. So generally I think bold letters are better for screen. And the background, I'm going to set the opacity to around 50%, so 0.5. So here you can see the opacity level. And okay, and I want to give it a stroke as well, a black stroke. And this is really thin, so you don't actually have control over how thick the stroke should be or not. But you have some control over the opacity level of it. So, and I want the text color to be white. So you can see 255, 255, 255. And that's 1 for the opacity level. And then confirm. So you get that. I'm gonna put it in the center. So you see these lines appear when you're actually on the center of the screen, both vertical and horizontal ones. So that's the text there. So I can also add an image. So let's just say logo. And I'm going to add that logo. Maybe drag it to the corner. And I can also add a scoreboard. So this is the most interesting part. So if I add a scoreboard, give a name to the scoreboard, call it football, and set the scale to 4. So I'm setting the scale quite large here, but that's because everyone these days watches everything on their phones. So everything needs to be quite big so that it can be seen on a small screen. And in order to change the details here, you have to click on each component in order to change the colors or the background and the text on it. So I'm going to click on the top part here, and I'm going to name this football just for the sake of having something. And here you can set the background colors and opacity and the font and text size. But yeah, I've just left it as it is. And then for this, I'm going to click here again and set this to team 2. And then click here, set this to team 1. And you can have a logo for each team as well. So I can select a blue ball for this team and a red ball. And I'm going to get rid of this. So this is also the score. Whereas I probably would be expecting the time to be displayed there as opposed to the score, because you already have these numbers here for the score. So I think that's redundant. Unless you have the score for the half or quarter of a particular sport, and then here you have the final score. But I'm going to hide that and press confirm. So here you can, for example, drag this to the bottom here. And the other thing you can do is you can hide any of these components. So if you press the eye icon there, you can hide it or show it. So for example, you might hide it and set the score to a particular number and then show the scores again. In fact, now that you have the numbers 2 and 1 here, the team names probably doesn't sound very good. So let me just edit that. So I'm going to call this Team Blue, and this one will be Team Red. And let me confirm that. So here you have the live video feed. So I'm going to switch it on, and I don't have anything in front of my camera right now, so it's just like a blank wall there. But that is the actual video feed coming in from the HDMI. So you can hide the scoreboard and even the logo, or maybe you can leave the logo if you want to until the stream starts. And once you start the stream, then you can actually switch off this item and then maybe show the scoreboard, for example, or edit the scoreboard. So you would hide the scoreboard, edit it to put the correct team names there and maybe correct the scores. And then once you've corrected that, then you would show it again and hide it again and so on. And if you want to be really adventurous, then you can, I guess, add effects as well. So you could add something like this. And when something happens, you can show it or hide it, for example. So this hasn't actually started appearing on the live stream yet. So as you can see, it says not started. But if you press start, all these overlays will be shown in the stream. So I will come back to this in a few moments, but I just want to go over some of the other stuff that you can do with the ZowieBox. So the audio, I think this is important that you enable the audio and set it to HDMI. Or in my case, I set it to HDMI anyway, but if you want the audio from the camera, then you set it to HDMI. If you want to have a separate line in where you combine maybe the audio from different sources or have a switcher or whatever, then you can set it to line in. But in my case, I'm going to set it to HDMI and I've already saved it, so I don't need to save it again. And these are the settings I have. So 128 bitrate and sampling rate is 48 and it's a 16-bit audio. And then here you have the RTSP settings. So for your mainstream and substream. So I mentioned that you could have 2 streams being done. I don't use RTSP, but if you want, you can have that option. So one of the nice things about the ZowieBox is that since you have the overlay stuff, you don't actually need to bring your stream to a computer or laptop or whatever and then put these effects in OBS. You can actually do everything here. Well, not everything, but you can have the basic stuff. So, you know, the scoreboard, which is the main thing that I would be concerned with. And then if you want the logo and that kind of stuff. But if you obviously want to do more advanced stuff, then you can still use OBS on a PC. So I don't use this. And this is where you go live. So essentially what you do is you add a new connection. So I'm going to add this. And here you have 2 options. You have YouTube or custom. So if you set it to YouTube, it asks you to essentially connect it to your YouTube login, which is not what I want to do. I prefer to actually set it to custom and then put in my RTMP details here. And you can also do SRT. And YouTube does support SRT, but it's in beta. So if you want to get on the SRT program for YouTube, you can contact support and ask them for them to add you to their SRT beta program until it becomes publicly available for everyone else. But for the time being, I will do RTMP since that's what's publicly supported on YouTube. And just going to call this YouTube football maybe. And here you put the URL and the stream key and the description. So for the description, I'm going to put the platform is on, the protocol it uses, and I guess the purpose it's for, and which device I'm using. So you can get the URL and the stream key from YouTube. So if I go here, this is the URL from YouTube. So I'm going to copy that and I will paste it here. Now I will put a / here and then copy the stream key and paste it in front of the slash. And I will also paste the stream key in the stream key field. But I think just having everything in the push URL should work. And there's a question mark here, which allows you to see all the different formats that you can have your URL with the stream key and port. In my experience, I don't actually need to put the port number here. Just having it in this format should do it. So I'm going to save this. It says the URL already exists. So okay, so I'm going to delete this since it already exists. And this is the URL that I had already created and started testing with. So that's the one. And yeah, it already exists, so it's not going to save it, but that doesn't matter because it's already saved. So once you want to go live with the stream, then you just press this button here and it goes live. So I will come back to this in a moment, but before that, you have the option to record your live stream on the box. In my case, one of the reasons I want to use an external encoder is because I want to record the video footage on the camera. And the camera I'm using is the Panasonic Lumix GH5 Mark II. So if I stream directly with that camera, I cannot record at the same time. So I will end up with a low quality video footage from the stream. But if I use an external recorder, which is connected through HDMI, I can record the high quality footage on the camera and then stream using the HDMI port with an external encoder such as the ZowieBox. So for me, I don't really want to record on the ZowieBox itself, but if you're not using a camera, for example, if you're streaming from a computer or a screen or any other thing, then you might want to actually record on the ZowieBox itself. And you have a few different options on how to record. So you can record by inserting a micro SD card, or you can also record to a USB stick, from what I understand. And you can also record to a network attached storage device. So there's multiple options on how you can record your video footage at a higher quality in comparison to the stream. But anyway, this is a feature that I won't be using, but this ZowieBox does have a lot of features, which I don't actually use all of them. I just use the streaming functionality, HDMI in, put the overlays, and then output it via RTMP to YouTube or SRT. And I don't use any of the PTZ functionality or the NDI functionality neither. And here you have the NDI functionality, which you can see I've disabled all of it. And here you have the network configuration. So I've enabled DHCP, but you can obviously configure this the way it works for you. And you have two options in terms of the Wi-Fi. So you can have it as a hotspot and be able to connect to the device directly. And you can access this same interface through that. Or if you don't want to use the hotspot functionality, if you're connected via an Ethernet cable, then you can just use it as a Wi-Fi connection. So another additional connection to the internet. I haven't actually used this, but I assume that you can actually upload your stream through the Wi-Fi card as well. And here are the default ports used for the different protocols. So when I didn't input the RTMP port, 1935 is actually the default port to be used for RTMP. But it could be that the server you're using is not using the default port and is using a different port. So in that case, you can come and change the port here, although I don't recommend that because these are the default ports for these services. So I would say it's better that you actually change it in that one particular configuration for the server that you're using, as opposed to changing the default values for the ports here. And this is the, I guess, the local DNS name, which you can use to access the ZowieBox, and you can actually change it as well. I haven't changed it. This is the default name that it came with, so that doesn't bother me. And here you can add details of your network attached storage if you have one. I don't have one, and I don't intend to store the video on network attached storage, but you have the options here if you wanted to do that. So one thing I wanted to mention about the network, which is a really good backup for power. So the network port on the ZowieBox actually supports power over Ethernet. So what you can do is power the device over the Ethernet cable, as long as the cable that comes to it and the router that is connected to has that feature. So in essence, you could have redundancy in your power for this device, and I think that's quite nice. So let's just say you have your ZowieBox connected to a power bank through the USB-C port, and then you want to change the power bank and you want to unplug it. If the device is being powered via the Ethernet port, then you don't really have any issues. And the last item here is system. So here you can choose the theme. So you can have a white background or a dark theme. I prefer a dark theme, so which is what I've changed it to. And the working mode, encoder or decoder. In my case, it's an encoder because I'm taking the HDMI input, encoding it, and transmitting it as a stream. NDI, I'm not using NDI, but that's activated here for anyone who wants to use the NDI. And here you have some user management, so the usernames and password in order to be able to log into this screen and do various functionalities. And the basic user should have less, I think, options in terms of what they can do and can't do. And you can also add a new user, but I'm not going to do that anyway. And you can choose the time zone you're in and a time server. So if you're not happy with this time server, you can change it to something else. And you can restart it or restore the default factory settings. And you can also upgrade the software. So I actually did upgrade the firmware on this device as soon as I got it. And I think it's worth keeping an eye on their firmware updates because ZowieTek tends to update their firmware quite frequently and they add new features to it. So it's definitely worth keeping an eye on and updating your firmware to see what they add, because some of the features, such as the scoreboard features, I think are relatively new. So just make sure you update that if you want to benefit from the newer features. But if you're not using any of that or you're not interested, then I guess you don't really need to worry about it unless you want to make sure that there's no bug impacting you. And then you have an option to enable logs on the main server and the web server. So if you want to do any troubleshooting, you can enable this, and then you can download the logs to see if there's something going wrong or you just want to find out what's happening. And here you have the version numbers for the hardware, the firmware, and the web interface application, NDI, and the serial number for the device. And here you have the QR code. So the QR code would point to this interface using the DNS name that it has. So that's kind of pretty much it in a nutshell. So if I go back to YouTube, here you can see that I've set up a live stream on YouTube, and I have the stream key, the URL here. And if I start streaming, you should see it here. So I'm going to go to the ZowieBox interface, and I'm going to go to streaming and then to live. And here you can see YouTube RTMP, right cameraman test. I'm going to enable this. So it says online, and here you can see the rate at which it's uploading the stream. So slightly over 3 megabits per second. It's interesting because that actually went up to almost 4 megabits per second. So that's something to keep in mind. If your network bandwidth is really limited, then maybe you want to set it to an even lower number. And just going to go to Encoder again to highlight that using the high profile is the best option, so you get the maximum compression. And RTMP is going to work with H.264, and these are the settings I've chosen. So if you go back to the overlays, in fact, before I enable the overlays, let's go to my stream, see if that's come on yet. Okay, so YouTube says excellent connection, but the picture hasn't appeared yet. Okay, so now the picture has appeared. There's nothing in front of my camera, which is why you don't actually see anything useful there, but that is the video feed which is coming from the actual camera. So I haven't started the live stream yet, and I don't really need to do it for this purpose, but this is just a demo. But you can see that there's no overlays here. So if I start this, then the overlays should appear on YouTube. So let's see how long it takes. I think usually it takes around over 10 seconds for sure. Let's see. Okay, so not as long as I thought it would take. But anyway, there you can see the icons and the logos. And here, you cannot see the image, but if you do want to see the image, you can just enable it here. So now you can see the video feed from my camera with these logos on top of it. And you see these texts here, which says stream starts at. This is one of the ones which I've hidden. So I can enable it again, and there you see it. And when you don't see it, the text is there, but this is not actually visible in the output stream. So this is just for the reference of the person who's working with this interface to be able to know where everything will go once it actually goes. So if you wanted, you could potentially just move this down and then display it. So it would show up here, and then hide it, and then move it up. So you can move things and change numbers or whatever without having that being output to the live stream. And here you can see the live stream. So I'm going to hide things like the boom icon, and we have the logo. So here you can see the scores. So for example, I can reduce this to 0. So 0-1 to the red team. And you should be able to see the score reflecting that on the stream, which is going to YouTube. So there you see that the scores are being reduced, and there you have 0 and 1. And if the logo is getting in the way of the image that you want to capture, you can obviously hide it. And the size of this can also be changed. So you can, whenever you want to make changes, my advice would be to actually hide that component first, then make the changes, then make it appear again. So for example, if I hide this football scoreboard, then it will disappear from the stream. And we can see that it actually disappears from the stream, but it just takes like, I don't know, 10 seconds, maybe slightly more. Okay, so there it disappears. So if you go back to ZowieBox, then we can edit it. So let's just say, for example, we want to make it smaller. And let me confirm that. And let's just say I want to correct the score because I made a mistake. I can make the changes to the score. And now that I've made it smaller, I need to reposition it. So I can drag it to the center and move it down a little bit more, so there's more space for the actual video footage. And then I can show it again. So now it's smaller and it is a bit more to the bottom, so it gets less in the way of the actual video footage. And then eventually it will show up here after a while. Yeah, there you see it. So that's how to use it with RTMP with 1080p to YouTube, and that's how I actually use it. So in regards to using this device remotely, you obviously need to have access to a network connection and an internet connection. So if you're using 4G or 5G connection, then you need a separate device to be able to provide that. But if you have access to a Ethernet cable which connects to internet on the location that you're shooting, then you can connect directly to that, and that would obviously be the preferred option. And not only that, but if you go to Encoder, if you have a good internet connection, then obviously you can go up to over 51 megabits per second. So that's 51.2 megabits per second is the maximum that you can go up to. And the minimum is 64 kilobits per second, which is not really practical to use. I mean, you wouldn't be able to see anything useful with such a low quality. I would say with H.264, you probably want around 3 to 4 megabits per second to have a decent quality image. And anything above that is really a bonus. And if you have the internet connection that supports 50 megabits per second, then you should consider going to 4K, because you would be able to get a 4K image at a good quality for that. Anyway, let me know if you have any questions about the ZowieBox, the ZowieTek, and if you want me to demonstrate something particular around the software or the box itself,